Being British, I love complaining. It's what I was made to do. So when I discovered these 10 watches and found there was nothing to complain about, I was very disappointed. Nevertheless, I thought since some of you might like to see these supposedly perfect watches, I'd button it all up into a list for you. The most perfect watch ever, you'll have to stay to the end for that one. The 1930s was a tough time. The Great Depression, World War II, the birth of Bernie Ecclestone. These great tragedies may have soured what could have otherwise been a decent 10 years, but nevertheless, it's not all bad. As my old nan used to say, look on the bright side. Granted, she was teaching me how to use a torch, but the sentiment still works. And the brighter side of the 1930s was the popularization of the sector dial watch, which, as the name suggests, divided the dial into chunks, or sectors, if you will. Those sectors numbered anything from 4 to 60, with 4 known as a crosshair dial. Ah, guns, what will they think of next? The reason these dials were broken up into sectors was so they could be laid on a map and used to communicate directions clearly in briefings on the front line during World War I. People back home were still rocking pocket watches then, and it was the classic sector dial design that started moving people over to wristwatches. This Longines Heritage Classic Sector recalls one of those post-war pre-war 1930s sector dial watches, and if you can find a single thing wrong with it, then you're probably the kind of person who thinks water is too wet and that air makes you gassy. The secret is very simple. Longines didn't try to be smartasses about it. A simple steel case in 38.5mm wrapped around a quadrificated dial in black or silver with hands so pencil straight they make lasers look sloppy. There's some sunray action on the outer dial and second subdial, and it's all so crisp it was probably made in an air fryer. Even the caliber L893, Etamade but exclusive to Longines, gets an old-timey beat that even your granddad can throw shapes to, ticking at 25,200 VPH for that authentic sub-seconds wibble. At £2,150, it's a damn sight better than the Draft. World War II introduced a brand new way to slaughter humans en masse from the comfort of a padded seat, a little device invented by 2 bicycle mechanics from Ohio, the aeroplane. Learning their trade during the great bicycle craze of 1892, the brothers Wright took a keen interest in aviation when glider pilot Otto Lilienthal died mid-flight, well, technically at the end, and they thought, we can do that too. Only it wouldn't be the Wright brothers that died at the hands of their invention. Wilbur succumbed to bad shellfish aged 45. Orville lived long enough to see the devastating impact of his creation during World War II. He remarked, "We dared to hope we had invented something that would bring lasting peace to the earth. But we were wrong." Anyway, the people flying those planes through the 40s and 50s and into the 60s and 70s heavily relied upon accurate timekeeping for reasons I think are too obvious to require explaining. The addition of the chronograph first in instruments and later in wristwatches gave pilots more control and precision over their maneuvers, and as such they became part of the standard issue equipment for military aviators. Hamilton was one of a number of suppliers to the British Royal Air Force during that time, and this Khaki Aviation Pilot Pioneer chronograph is an incredibly close replica of those watches. You can see from the off that it's designed simply to be capable at its job and no more. The 40mm asymmetric case in brushed steel exists so the strap can keep it on your wrist and so the gubbins don't fall out. The hands and dial are clear and readable and won't be impacted by glare. The pushers are there too, for pushing. There's not a hint of frippery. A hand-wound version of the ETA 7753 reminds you that if an RAF pilot can find the time to wind their watch, then so can you. But you get the last laugh because yours will last 60 hours and the silicon balance spring will be impervious to magnetism. They might wonder why you're sticking with the same technology they were using 50 years ago, but don't think about that because this watch costs just under £2,000. What do Max Planck, Ludwig Boltzmann and the Tudor Black Bay 58 have in common? They've all contributed unchanging constants in the universe. In the case of the Black Bay 58, that constant is that any time I talk about watches that are obvious purchases at their price point, it will get mentioned. Very unironically, it's like clockwork. From 2018, when it first came out, until the last dying gasp of this reality, the Black Bay 58 will be the perfect, if dull, choice to buy. What do this mortal coil, Audio Slave, and the Tudor Black Bay 58 have in common? They're all supergroups. Not only does the Tudor Black Bay 58 combine all the best bits of the Rolex and Tudor back catalogue, it's also so perfect that it's actually a little bit boring. That sounds like a complaint, but it's not. I should know, I'm an expert. But when it comes to perfection, boring is best. Look at those snowflake hands. They're a signature of the Tudor Submariners of the 60s and 70s, and if you think they don't look good, then go speak to Mr. Beast and he might be able to sort your eyesight out. Then there's the size, 39mm with the in-house and chronometer certified caliber MT 5400, keeping things trim. Water resistance is 200 meters, perfect for any swimming pool or washing up bowl, and it'll even look after itself for 3 days while you go gallivanting off with a more interesting but ultimately flawed watch that'll soon wear thin anyway. What do Michaela Moroni, Warren Buffett, and the Tudor Black Bay 58 have in common? A curious draw to silver. In an attempt to bring your attention back to this perfect watch choice, the one I've selected is the 925 edition. Not only is this a precious metal watch for less than £4,000, it's also unusual in being brushed instead of polished, and uniquely features a colour combination of everyone's favourites, grey and brown. It's a perfect watch, even if Moroni turns her nose up at it. The Omega Speedmaster is the greatest watch ever. It contains the greatest category of movement ever, the hand-wound horizontal clutch chronograph. It was part of the greatest achievement ever, the moon landings, which, might I remind any skeptics, was undertaken no less than 6 times. If you think otherwise, I'll see you in the comments. One of the funny things about Rolex is how I don't want one, but I really want one. And if there was one I could have that would just be the perfect forever and always watch, it would be this, the 36mm Explorer 1. Sure, its CV may as well have been concocted by Frank Abagnale, but as a watch to wear on your wrist and to tell the time from, it's about bloody perfect. Why the smaller 36mm version? For one, it's too small for would-be robbers to see across the street. Also, the 40mm version just doesn't look right. It doesn't. I don't know what Rolex did, but the bezel gives me the same anxiety as when I see a car driving down the motorway with a loose hubcap. If a 36mm Explorer is good enough for Team America star Matt Damon and astronaut Tom Hanks, it's good enough for anyone. It's just the perfect watch to refer to as this old thing. You can't do that with any of the flashier Rolexes. And if, like me, you often forget how numbers work, the Explorer has 3 handy little reminders around the dial just in case. It's like Clippy, but for watches. What makes the Explorer the ultimate perfect watch really though is the name at the top of the dial. It's £6,100, which makes it one of the cheaper Rolex watches you can buy, but nevertheless it grants you entry into a very exclusive club that only offers around 1 million entries every year. Only 1 million. That's just 0.01% of the world's population. Put it all together and you have the blueprint for, well, a watch. It's what a child would come up with if you asked them to draw one. It's what I would have drawn anyway, and it would have made a welcome change from drawing the demon that lives in my closet over and over again. Perfection has been described by involuntary IWC ambassador Antoine de Saint-Exupéry as not when there is nothing more to add, but when there is nothing left to take away. And since the Rolex store usually has nothing at all to take away, I'd call that point proven. I'm nearly 100 years old, and yet when I saw a video the other week of a remote control Transformers toy that could drive as a truck, walk as a robot, and transmogrify from one to the other at the push of a button, I was immediately transported back to my youth when I wasn't able to have any cool toys then either. The Jaeger-LeCoultre Reverso Tribute Chronograph seeks to right those childhood wrongs by offering a discreet second chance at owning the Transformers toy you always wanted, with the added benefit of being able to bring it to school, work, without getting your head flushed down the toilet. The Reverso Tribute Chronograph is all business up front with a 49 by 30mm steel case at just 11mm thick, blessed with a blue sunburst dial and a pair of Dauphine hands that act as the moustache of this particular disguise. So far, so reserved, as Jaeger-LeCoultre is well known for. This side of the Reverso tells your peers that you are trustworthy and sensible, and not someone who'd hide a kipper in a colleague's drawer just before the summer break. You'd barely even know know this thing was a chronograph, besides the imperceptibly subtle pushers, but go gadget watch and flip this thing around and all hell breaks loose. Now you're getting a raw look at the caliber 860, which adds to the time-telling portion carried through from the front, with a central seconds track and a retrograde 30-minute subdial at the bottom for the chronograph. Even Michael Bay would be impressed with all the moving parts on offer here. The balance is on show, as is the column wheel, plus the motion works that decode the minute hand into hours. It's the watch equivalent of those pens with a lady in the clear bit up top that you'd tip upside down and all her clothes would fall off, but for watches, and for £23,900. I only very recently actually got to experience a Moritz Grossman in person. I knew they were special, but hadn't really properly appreciated just how special. They were, however, too big for me, numbering in the early 40s in diameter. Just as well really, because I'd need Chris Brown levels of immunity to deliver that much abuse to my wallet. All that went very wrong when I discovered the 39mm Tefnut. Alongside other such names as Hamatic, where else would you keep your ham? Tefnut may sound like a non-stick testicle, but it's actually Moritz Grossman's first watch in 39mm, and it's so beautiful I expect climate protesters to throw cake at it. Dial side, it gets Moritz Grossman's iconic purpled hands, which are pure pub chat bragging rights. Typically, hands are heat blue to make them corrosion resistant and give them a contrasting hue, with the working range of the metal being somewhere between 290 and 310 degrees Celsius to get it right. That's a small margin, but compared to purple, it's a hot dog in a hallway. To get purple, you have a working window of just a few degrees either way. Too much and you get into the blues, too little and you get brown. By the time you've told them all this, your friends will have left the pub and you'll be able to finish their drinks for free. The watch basically pays for itself. What's really special about the dial is the silver coating, which has been applied by friction using a stiff brush that reveals a stunning metallic texture. You know a watch is good when even the watchmaker rubs one out onto it. The caliber 100.2 goes full German. That is to say there's a 3/5 German silver architecture, screwed gold chatons and engraved cocks, not whatever it was you were thinking. The screws are purpled instead of blued, of course, and the jewels are all clear for another little signature touch to the €25,400 watch. Have you ever just stopped for a moment and taken in the beauty of the everyday? Just recently I was helping a friend down by the lake, and as we parked the van and stumbled between us down to the jetty, the moonlit surface of the gently moving water caught my eye. I didn't really have the time to appreciate it then, but with the Grand Seiko Lake Suwa Before Dawn, also known as the SLGA 021, I can relive the majestic splendour of that moment once more. This is the 854th watch in the Evolution 9 collection, which differentiates itself from the other Heritage, Elegance and Sports collections by having a different name. The Evo 9 was first announced by Ambassador Tommy Mackinnon with the white birch, which combined a deeply textured silver dial with the 9S-A5 high-beat mechanical. The Lake Suwa Before Dawn is the refinement of the Evo 9 collection to its full Grand Seiko-y peak. It loses the mechanical 9S-A5 for the spring drive 9R-A2, which is not only pumping in times of half a second per day, but also combines subtlety with elegance in a way only Grand Seiko can do. At first glance, it's a plain old slab of metal compared to the 9S-A5's more traditional bridgework, and the blasted finish is not as flashy as the 9S-A5's striping, but just wait a moment. The 9R-A2 takes the Micro Artist Studio Special 9R-02 as inspiration, applying delicate finishes with utmost excellence. There's beveling everywhere, and the mirror polishing it receives appears to be closer to the work of the Micro Artist Studio than it does the average Grand Seiko. The finish and relief found in the Power Reserve alone feels like it's from several price categories above. Why the Before Dawn over the standard Lake Suwa? Well, for one, being in steel, it's a lot cheaper at £8,700 versus £9,400, but mainly because of the dial. Both use the Omiwatari's texture but with a deeper, more pearlescent blue, and at first glance the pricier Lake Suwa looks more eye-catching, the lighter tone glowing on the ripples at any angle. By comparison, the Before Dawn in many lights looks almost black, like there's no texture at all. But when a beam of light strikes it just so, instead of looking like a rippled texture casting light and shadow over static relief, it genuinely looks like the movement of waves under a moonlit sky. It's really quite remarkable, and it makes the Before Dawn, for me, the most Grand Seiko watch Grand Seiko makes right now, even above the Snowflake. There's a magic to it that takes me back to that clear, cold night beneath our nearest celestial neighbour, helping an old friend. There are few bands in the world that get to play new stuff at concerts without losing the crowd. If fans had it their way, a Smash Mouth gig would be an hour and a half of All-Star. Well, would have been, because sadly that's all gone now. But the golden brown 222 from Vashon Constantine is here to stay. The original 222 from 1977 was the reluctant pop single from classical musician Vashon Constantine, who begrudgingly acknowledged that hour-long concertos weren't going to pay the bills, and so they donned a clear acrylic violin and a fat bass line for the drop that was the 222. It must have churned their very guts making a hipster watch without a single complication bar the date. And even in 2023, it's still their biggest hit. They tried to dodge it for a bit by playing a rearranged version in the overseas, but the crowds just weren't having it. The 222 had to return as it was in 1977, and it surely did in 2022, reappearing like Mariah Carey at Christmas. And fair play to Vacheron, they did just bring it back virtually 1-to-1. It's a tight 37mm, bears the Maltese cross branding on the lower right shoulder, and is entirely hewn from yellow gold. I'm pretty sure I've seen this watch etched onto the wrists of ancient Egyptian gods, carved into the walls of the pyramids, and that's pretty much how it feels to wear one. So much so that even Breitling ambassador Brad Pitt betrayed the cinema squad to get one, leaving a devastated Adam Driver clutching his chronomat. Sure, there are some Vacheron tracks that are deeper, richer, and more profound, like the 57-260, which dominates the entire side of an LP, complete with the weird bit in the middle. Internet points to anyone who can name the song I'm referencing in the comments. But the 222 is the one we keep coming back to, that makes all the Spotify playlists and never gets old. It's simple, it's masterful, and Sam can definitely play this gold record again. Imagine a watch that was so perfect each part had to be created by the best in their field. It's like the Avengers of watchmaking, but less drawn out and unnecessary. That's how the Crador Eichi II was created, a platinum £50,000 example of what happens when you really try. You know that one kid at school who aced every test? This is the watch they'd make. Every part of it is profoundly ridiculous. It makes JPL look like it builds Lego kits and frequently misses a page. Every Eichi II is crafted in the mountainous region of Shinshu at the Micro Artist Studio, which of course couldn't just be based in an industrial estate in Milton Keynes. There are only around 10 employees, and each one is the best at their trade in all of Japan. Let's start with the dial. It looks like enamel, layers of glass powder fired onto a metal base, but it's not. It's porcelain. Yes, like a tiny dinner plate, but for eating with your eyes. But there are Seikos with porcelain dials, so how does that make the Eichi II special? It's all about the way the markers are applied. They aren't printed on with a squidgy rubber stamp like you would normally expect. One of the Micro Artist Studio artisans paints them on with a paintbrush. As someone who struggles to stay within the lines of a colouring book, I can very much appreciate that. It also fills me with great anxiety. The paintbrush used isn't just for painting the markers, but the logo as well. Why? Because it's the same deal with the hands and screws, which are heat blued. Usually they'd all be done in a batch, so they came out looking about the same shade, but here they're done one at a time. Again, just because. It's down to another artisan to make sure they each match. It's like cooking each piece of pasta one at a time to the perfect al dente. The caliber 7R14 is no exception to this rule of excess. It features the Micro Artist Studio logo, the lotus flower, no less than 1,000,000 times, and it's easy to see why they're so proud of it. With bevels deeper than East of Eden and glossier than a freshly waxed weasel, you might mistakenly think they'd been applied by the legend himself, Philippe Dufour. They weren't, but he did teach the Micro Artist Studio artisans how to do it, even down to the type of wood he uses to apply the polish. And this is the Japanese we're talking about. They don't half-arse anything. The guy doing the work probably locked himself in a cabin up a mountain for the winter and polished 17 miles of beveling until he was happy. Happy enough, at least. Enough to make Dufour's polishing look like the work of a roadside windshield cleaner. As such, only 25 Eichi IIs can be made per year, and that's just perfect. It means you'll never have that awkward moment where you run into a friend and you're both wearing the same watch. That's it, my list of perfection. Tell me what you think are the most perfect watches in existence down in the comments below. Please like and subscribe as well, as it really helps, and don't forget to leave your 1,000,000-watt garden light on all night. Goodbye. Still here? Watch this video next.